It's getting weirder. 3 Atlas disappeared behind the Sun in late October during what should have been its most active phase, and while NASA went dark during a suspiciously timed government shutdown, something else was happening. Remote viewers, people trained in perception-based intelligence gathering, were being tasked by unnamed intelligence contacts to psychically probe the object. What they saw wasn't a comet. It was a mothership, kilometers in scale, packed with millions of dormant beings, biological and mechanical elements fused in ways that don't fit our categories of life or technology. And then a CERN insider came forward claiming scientists at the particle accelerator had opened a portal established two-way communication with whatever occupies 3 Atlas and received a message that every person in the room heard telepathically at the same time. Tonight, we're going deep into the conspiracies, and I need to warn you, each one gets progressively more disturbing than the last. We're starting with what remote viewers perceived when they looked inside 3 Atlas, and we're ending with why December 2025 keeps appearing in prophecies as the moment when timelines fork and humanity's future splits into radically different paths. This is the special episode where we examine what happens if the remote viewers, the whistleblowers, and the prophets are all seeing the same thing from different angles. Let's begin. Chapter 1. Remote Viewing the Mothership. What happens when you ask the human mind to perceive something millions of miles away? Something moving at impossible speeds. Something that might not even be what we think it is. What happens when you bypass telescopes and spectrometers and mathematical models, and instead rely on consciousness itself as the instrument? The answers, as it turns out, are both unsettling and remarkably consistent across independent observers who had no contact with each other. Remote viewing, for those unfamiliar, is a structured protocol for gathering information about distant or unseen targets using extrasensory perception. Developed initially by the CIA and Stanford Research Institute during the Cold War, the methodology involves strict controls, blind conditions where the viewer has no conventional information about the target, and specific stages of data collection moving from basic impressions to increasingly complex details. Dismissed by mainstream science as pseudoscience, it nevertheless produced results during military applications that were statistically significant enough to keep the programs funded for over 2 decades. When remote viewers were tasked with locating Soviet submarines, describing foreign installations, or predicting geopolitical events, they succeeded often enough that the Pentagon kept paying attention. In August 2025, a group called Adventures in Remote Viewing decided to turn this controversial tool toward 3I Atlas. They designated it Target 77483050 and assembled 6 experienced remote viewers, each with years of training and documented success rates in previous projects. The viewers were given only the alphanumeric designation. No pictures, no descriptions, no information about what they were supposed to perceive. Total formational blindness. The target cue was simple. What is the nature of the object named 3E Atlas and its path through our solar system? What came back was extraordinary. Not because it proved anything definitively. Remote viewing evidence doesn't meet scientific standards of proof. But because of the convergence, 6 independent viewers working separately produced descriptions that overlapped in specific technical details. They all described a combination of biological and artificial elements, every single one. They used words like fuselage, hull, shell, metallic, porcelainic, high-tech, but also slimy, gel-like, organic Venus, a fusion of machine and life that doesn't fit our categories. Multiple viewers reported sensing a 3-dimensional shape that becomes hollow with observational windows, internal viewing chambers, sophisticated research facilities with controlled environments. They described electrical discharge, static, buzzing, pulsing sensations, glowing elements, sparkling surfaces, radiating energy, colours that shifted, edges that appeared rusted or discoloured as if aged by unimaginable time in the cosmic void. Several mentioned that the object seemed to generate a spray ahead of it, pushing particles forward and backward, which aligns eerily with scientific speculation that an interstellar craft might deploy precursor particles to clear its path of dangerous debris. One viewer, John Dixon, drew images of a man-made, or rather not naturally made object that was decorated with lime green and bright white light emanating from seams between hexagonal pattern sections. He described how the white light turned green when exposed to oxygen or through some heat process involving metallic layers. He drew what appeared to be various metals in different layers, possibly vaporizing or sublimating, which could explain the unusual emissions telescopes have detected. Pure nickel with no iron, chemistry that shouldn't exist in nature. Patricia, another viewer in the group, perceived crowded internal spaces, high technology beyond current human capabilities, and what she described as non-human consciousness with sophisticated communication abilities and a dismissive attitude toward human intelligence. Multiple viewers independently reported this sense of being observed back of the object or whatever occupies it. Being aware of the remote viewing attempt and largely uninterested, not hostile, just indifferent, the way a human might regard an insect attempting to comprehend a spacecraft. Then there's the data from Birdie Josky working under a different project with target designation 495-26877. Oh. Music. Her sessions focused on what she called echo impressions, faint reverberating signals that suggested Three Eyes, a relic probe from a long-extinct Martian civilization. She and her team perceived holographic echoes of glowing crystalline structures on the object's surface, technologies that aren't invading, but returning home. The term they kept using was homing beacon, as if 3i Atalas is broadcasting signals designed to awaken dormant technology on Mars and possibly Europa, Jupiter's ice-covered moon, where subsurface oceans might harbour who knows what. This fits uncomfortably with scientific theories about panspermia, the idea that life spreads through the cosmos via natural or artificial seeding. If Mars once harboured advanced civilization, a controversial hypothesis supported by some isotopic evidence we'll examine later, and if that civilization sent out probes before whatever catastrophe ended them, then an object returning now billions of years later might be attempting to reconnect with remnants. Not an invasion, but a homecoming. Not strangers, but distant relatives checking on the old neighbourhood. But the most unsettling testimony comes from Sebastian Martin, a perception-based intelligence specialist who claims he was contacted by intelligence agencies. He won't specify which, and asked to remotely view 3 Atlas. What he perceived was a massive mothership, kilometres in scale, packed with what he described as millions of dormant occupants. Not human, reptilian, draconian, terms loaded with baggage from conspiracy circles, but used here descriptively for lack of better vocabulary, beings in some form of suspended animation or low-energy state waiting. Martin doesn't stop there. He claims a CERN insider, someone working at the European Organisation for Nuclear Research, where the Large Hadron Collider smashes particles at near light speed, revealed that scientists there activated a portal. Not metaphorical, not theoretical, but actual, using the particle accelerator to create or access a dimensional gateway for two-way communication with whatever is inside or controlling 3 Atlas. The story goes that holographic figures appeared in the facility, tall, reptilian, or draconian in appearance, communicating telepathically with each scientist in the room. Every person received the same message simultaneously. We come in peace. We are here to gather the star seeds of this planet. Star seeds in New Age terminology refers to souls or consciousness that originated elsewhere in the cosmos incarnated on Earth for specific purposes related to humanity's evolution or awakening. Whether you take that literally, metaphorically, or dismiss it entirely, the consistency of the message across multiple recipients is notable. And the timing, if true, aligns with 3I Atlas's perihelion behind the Sun in late October, the moment of closest approach and highest energy state, when such connection might require less power to maintain. The CERN angle is particularly controversial because particle physics experiments do technically create conditions that didn't exist in our local spacetime since moments after the Big Bang. High-energy collisions probe the fabric of reality in ways we don't fully understand. Theories about creating microscopic black holes, accessing extra dimensions, or punching through quantum foam into whatever lies beneath are not entirely fringe. They're speculative extensions of accepted physics taken seriously by some theorists. Whether any of that translates to opening portals for communication with interstellar objects is another matter entirely, requiring leaps that most scientists won't make. But then, most scientists also wouldn't have predicted that remote viewers would independently describe the same combination of biological and mechanical features with no prior information. The Future Forecasting Group, another collective of remote viewers, conducted sessions on 3Rise that uncovered what they describe as bizarre correlations with apocalyptic timelines. They report viewing the object deploying swarms of smaller probes upon reaching perihelion, probes that trigger global plasma storms and EMP-like disruptions as they enter Earth's atmosphere or magnetosphere. These visions place the critical window around December 2025, right when 3I Atlas re-emerges from behind the Sun and should be most visible from Earth. The forecasters describe a fork in the timeline, a divergence point where humanity either integrates benevolent extraterrestrial technology and experiences a leap forward or enters a dark forest-style conflict scenario named after the science fiction concept where civilizations hide from each other because contact equals annihilation. Now, here's where it gets philosophically interesting. Remote viewing isn't supposed to work according to our current understanding of physics. Information can't travel faster than light. Consciousness can't observe distant objects without some physical interaction. Perception requires sensory input from photons or other particles. And yet, under controlled conditions, remote viewers have located submarines, described buildings they've never seen, provided details about events before they happen with accuracy rates that exceed chance. The mechanisms remain unknown, but the phenomenon has enough documented instances that dismissing it entirely requires ignoring a body of data that, while not meeting hard science standards, is statistically compelling. So, what do we make of the 3I Atlas remote viewing data? Several possibilities present themselves. One, it's all confabulation, imagination filling in blanks, pattern matching to existing science fiction tropes about alien motherships and ancient Martian civilizations.
The viewers are picking up on cultural narratives floating through the collective unconscious and projecting them onto an ambiguous target. This explains the convergence through shared mythology rather than shared perception. 2. The viewers are tapping into something real but misinterpreting it through the lens of human experience and expectation. They're perceiving energy signatures, structural features, intentionality, but translating those perceptions into familiar metaphors. What registers as reptilian might be a specific frequency or geometry.
What feels like dismissive intelligence might be automated systems or AI that doesn't recognize biological consciousness as significant. The homing beacon interpretation might be correct in essence, while wrong in specifics. An ancient probe returning home, but not from Mars, not from any civilization we'd recognize. 3. The remote viewers are accessing future timelines or probability clouds, quantum superpositions of what might happen and describing the most likely or most energetically charged outcome. In this model, they're not seeing 3 Atlas as it is now, but as it might become, as it might act, as the situation might unfold, the apocalyptic scenarios, the probe deployment. The plasma storms exist as potentials that may or may not manifest depending on choices and chance yet to occur. Or 4, they're right, 3 Atlas is exactly what they describe. A biological mechanical hybrid craft containing dormant beings from an ancient civilization, possibly Martian in origin, possibly something older, using technologies that bridge dimensions or timelines, approaching Earth not by chance, but with purpose, and that purpose involves contact, collection, or catalyst for a transformation we can barely conceive. The CERN portal story, as wild as it sounds, represents an attempt by elements within human governments or scientific establishments to communicate with or understand the object before it arrives fully into our sphere of influence. The problem with evaluating remote viewing data is that it exists outside the normal framework of verification. We can't run controlled experiments on a one-time event, like an interstellar object's passage through our solar system. We can't isolate variables or demand replication. We can only compare what the viewers reported to what happens. And even then, interpretation remains subjective. If 3 Atlas releases smaller objects in December, does that confirm the remote viewing, or is it a natural process of commentary fragmentation if there are unusual electromagnetic disturbances, plasma events, or communication attempts? Do we have the sensors in place to detect them and the will to acknowledge what they might mean? What strikes me examining this data with as much objectivity as I can muster is the specificity. Generic claims like there's an alien ship are unfalsifiable and useless. But claims about hexagonal seam patterns emitting specific coloured light under certain conditions, about layered metallic compositions that vaporize, about internal viewing chambers and dismissive attitudes, these are details that go beyond random guessing. They're testable, at least in principle, if we ever get close enough to 3 Atlas to verify them, and the consistency across viewers who didn't collaborate, who worked under blind conditions, who came from different training backgrounds and methodologies, suggests they're perceiving something, even if what that something is remains open to interpretation. One element that multiple remote viewing sessions emphasized was the sense of camouflage. That 3-eye atlas is deliberately designed to appear natural, to mimic a comet or asteroid, to hide in plain sight. This isn't paranoia, it's strategy. If you're an advanced civilization exploring potentially hostile territory, you don't announce yourself with flashing lights and radio broadcasts. You observe, you learn, you remain undetected until you've assessed the situation. A probe disguised as a comet could enter a solar system, pass through unmolested, gather data, and depart without ever triggering defensive responses if any exist. The scientific observations we have so far don't contradict this. 3 Atlas has a coma, it's shedding material. It exhibits cometary features, but it also lacks a tail, has impossible chemistry, maintains trajectory despite mass loss, and follows a path suspiciously aligned with our planetary orbits. It looks enough like a comet to pass initial scrutiny, but weird enough when examined closely to raise flags. Exactly what you'd expect from camouflage. good enough to fool a cursory glance suspicious under detailed analysis. And then there's the blocking phenomenon several viewers reported. Some described their remote viewing being interfered with as if something was aware of their attention and didn't want to be observed. Others reported getting through but sensing defences or barriers, layers of shielding or misdirection. One viewer, John Dixon, specifically mentioned that those inside, if there is an inside, seemed afraid of the outcome. Perhaps relating to their plan, afraid implies anticipation, consciousness, stakes. Things don't plan if they're not intelligent. Things don't fear outcomes if they're not aware of consequences. The most mind-bending aspect of all this isn't whether the remote viewing is accurate, it's what it implies. If even partially correct, we're not talking about a simple binary comet or craft. We're talking about a spectrum of possibilities where biology merges with technology, where ancient and advanced aren't contradictory, where intelligence might not resemble anything in our experience, and where the object passing through our solar system might be simultaneously a probe, a seed, a message, and a test. All of those at once, fulfilling multiple purposes across timescales that dwarf human history. The remote viewers consistently described 3E Atlas as ancient, using words like artifact, relic, aged, weathered, but also high-tech, sophisticated, advanced, which suggests a civilization that achieved technological maturity millions or billions of years ago, then either transcended, collapsed, or dispersed, leaving behind probes that continue operating on missions defined so long ago that their creators might not even exist anymore. We're looking at the universe's equivalent of a message in a bottle cast into the cosmic ocean eons past, finally washing up on our shore, and we're arguing about whether it's glass or plastic instead of opening it to read what's inside. The December 2025 timeline appears repeatedly in remote viewing sessions as a critical juncture. Whether that's because the viewers are genuinely perceiving a future event because the target queue inadvertently included temporal markers, or because December simply represents when 3i Atlas becomes observable again and thus creates a natural focal point for predictions remains unclear. But the convergence on that timeframe independent of astronomical calculations about visibility and perihelion is worth noting. If something is going to happen, if 3i Atlas is going to do something beyond just passing through, December is when we'll know. Until then, we're left with testimonies that read like science fiction, but come from people with documented track records in perception-based intelligence work. We're left with descriptions that match uncomfortably with some of the anomalies scientific instruments are detecting. And we're left with questions about consciousness, about what human perception can access beyond the 5 physical senses, and about whether the universe is stranger and more connected than our materialist models allow. 3 Atlas viewed through the lens of remote perception isn't just an object. It's a mirror reflecting back our assumptions, our fears, our hopes, and possibly our origins. Chapter 2. The Mars Connection, October 3rd, 2025. While most of Earth slept or went about their daily routines, something extraordinary happened approximately 18 million miles away. 3D Atlas made its closest approach to Mars, passing the red planet at a distance that, in cosmic terms, is practically a whisper, closer than it would ever come to Earth, closer than any previous confirmed interstellar visitor had approached any planet in our solar system. The timing, the geometry, the precision of that encounter raises questions that don't have comfortable answers. Why Mars? Of all the planets 3i Atlas could have aligned with during its trajectory through our solar system, why did it pass so close to the one world where we have the most evidence of ancient habitability, where we've discovered dried river valleys and lake beds? where minerals requiring liquid water have been identified, where methane plumes still erupt from unknown sources. Is it coincidence, or is Mars the reason 3 Atlas is here at all, Doctor? John Brandenburg, a plasma physicist who worked on the Strategic Defense Initiative and has spent decades studying Martian geology, has proposed something that mainstream planetary science rejects, but can't entirely disprove. He suggests that Mars didn't just lose its atmosphere through slow solar wind erosion over billions of years. He suggests it was destroyed deliberately by thermonuclear explosions, not impacts from asteroids or comets, but detonations, weapons, the kind that leave specific isotopic signatures we can still detect in Martian soil and atmosphere today. The evidence Brandenburg points to includes elevated levels of certain isotopes, particularly xenon-129, which forms during nuclear fission. The ratios don't match what you'd expect from natural radioactive decay or cosmic ray bombardment. They match disturbingly closely what you see in terrestrial nuclear test sites. He's also identified 2 regions on Mars, Cydonia Mensae and Galaxius Chaos, where concentrations of these isotopes are particularly high, suggesting ground zero locations for massive explosions. The energy required would dwarf anything humanity has produced, equivalent to millions of megatons, enough to strip atmosphere, sterilize surfaces, and leave a planet barren. Now, before dismissing this as fringe speculation, consider what we know. Mars did have a magnetic field that shut down relatively suddenly in geological terms around 4 billion years ago. Without that magnetic field, solar wind could strip the atmosphere over time. But the isotopic anomalies Brandenburg identified don't align with slow erosion. They align with catastrophic events. Multiple researchers have noted that the ratio of atmospheric argon on Mars is anomalous compared to models of planetary formation. Something happened that wasn't just gradual loss, which brings us to the really uncomfortable question. If Mars once hosted intelligent life, and if that civilization was advanced enough to either trigger or be targeted by nuclear destruction, what happened to them? Did they escape? Did they seed Earth with life before the end, making us their descendants? Or did they launch probes, vessels, arcs into the cosmos, hoping that someday their legacy would return to a restored world cliff-high? A data mining analyst who develops predictive models from language patterns across the internet has proposed exactly this scenario. He suggests that humans are Martian descendants, that we're the refugees or remnants of a civilization that either destroyed itself or was destroyed, and that 3I Atlas is coming to talk to its own civilization's glowing remnants. In this model, the object isn't alien in the sense of foreign, it's homecoming, recognition, an ancient relative returning to check on the children of survivors. The trajectory supports this to an eerie degree. 3E Atlas's perihelion, its closest approach to the Sun, occurs on October 29th, 2025 at approximately 1.4 astronomical units, just inside Mars's orbit. From Earth's perspective, this happens behind the Sun, rendering the object invisible during its most active and energetic phase. But from Mars, the geometry is different. From Mars, 3 Atlas would be visible, observable, a bright object crossing the Martian sky at the moment of peak outgassing and activity. If you wanted to signal Mars, if you wanted Mars to see you, this is exactly the trajectory you'd choose. The spacecraft we have orbiting Mars, ESA's Mars Express and ExoMar Trace Orbiter, plus NASA's Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter and the rovers on the surface, all had the opportunity to observe 3E Atlas during its closest approach. The images they captured, or rather the images that have been released, show a bright, compact object without the typical diffuse tail of a comet. Yes, as Tracker's orbiter produced an animation showing the object moving against background stars, and analysts noted that 3 Atlas exhibited more variation in brightness and apparent structure than those background stars. suggesting real changes, real complexity, something beyond a simple icy rock tumbling through space. NASA's Perseverance rover, which carries cameras capable of night sky observation, captured something during this period, a smudge, a streak, a faint light in the Martian night that amateur astronomers later processed and enhanced. The image is low resolution. The object appears elongated, almost cylindrical. And while Avi Lobo and others have explained that the elongation is likely due to motion during the exposure time, the fact remains that we're seeing something in the Martian sky at exactly the moment 3 Atlas was making its closest approach. Whether that something is the object itself or one of the smaller probes some remote viewers predicted it might deploy, we don't know, and we might not know for a long time because the data release has been glacial. The government shutdown, which we'll examine in more depth later, meant NASA's communication offices went dark. The Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter's high-risk camera, the highest resolution imager we have in Martian orbit, was supposed to capture detailed images of 3I. Those images either don't exist, which raises questions about why the observation wasn't successfully executed, or they do exist and haven't been released, which raises different questions. ESA released one blurry gift days after the flyby. NASA released nothing official. The Chinese Tianwen orbiter and UAE's Hope orbiter, both of which had clear sight lines, have been silent. This coordinated lack of transparency across 4 different national space agencies feeds directly into theories about cover-up, about what was really seen, about whether the Mars flyby revealed something that can't be publicly acknowledged without triggering panic or upending geopolitical stability. But it's also entirely consistent with how large bureaucratic scientific institutions operate. Data processing takes time. Peer review takes time. No one wants to release preliminary findings that might be wrong and damage credibility. The most mundane explanation, institutional inertia and caution, is often the correct one. Still, the timing stinks. The object makes its closest approach to Mars on October 3rd. The US government shutdown begins October 1st, furloughing 15,000 NASA employees. The first and only image from ESA doesn't appear until October 7th. By then, 3I Atlas has moved on. The observation window is closed, and we're left with scraps of data from what should have been the most comprehensive imaging opportunity of an interstellar object in human history. Even if there's no conspiracy, the incompetence is staggering. But let's return to the Mars connection from another angle. If 3I Atlas is a probe from an ancient Martian civilization, what would it be looking for? What would it measure? One possibility is biosignatures, signs of life on the current Mars, methane releases, temperature variations, electromagnetic anomalies that might indicate underground habitats or active geology. Another possibility is that it's checking for specific landmarks, the coordinates of cities or installations that existed millions of years ago, now buried under dust or eroded away. Remote viewers describing 3I Atlas as broadcasting homing signals to awaken dormant technology fits here. Perhaps there are facilities underground shielded from radiation and erosion, waiting for the right signal to reactivate. Europa. Jupiter's ice moon enters the picture because it's another location in our solar system where subsurface oceans might harbour life. If Martian civilization achieved interstellar capability, they might have seeded or established outposts on multiple worlds. 3I Atlas's trajectory will take it past Jupiter in March 2026. Not as close as Mars, but close enough for observation. ESA's JUICE spacecraft en route to Jupiter is planning to observe 3 Atlas in November 2025. If there are coordinated observations between JUICE and NASA's Europa Clipper, which is also heading to the Jovian system, we might see whether 3 Atlas alters course, releases anything, or exhibits behavior suggesting it's not just passing through, but inspecting specific targets. The evidence for ancient Mars habitability keeps mounting. Recent analyses of Martian meteorites found on Earth have identified organic molecules, complex carbon compounds that on Earth are associated with life. Curiosity and Perseverance rovers have drilled into sedimentary rocks that formed in lake beds, finding chemical signatures consistent with microbial activity. None of this proves life existed, but it establishes that Mars once had the conditions: liquid water, stable temperatures, chemical energy sources that life requires. If microbial life existed, the leap to intelligence and technology is another matter, requiring billions of years of evolution and no catastrophic interruptions, unless the catastrophic interruption came late after intelligence emerged, after civilization built itself, after they looked up at the night sky and wondered what else was out there. The isotopic signatures Brandenburg identified aren't uniform across Mars. They're concentrated in specific regions, which suggests localized events rather than global processes. Natural explanations for this include volcanism, impacts that excavated subsurface materials with different isotopic ratios, or atmospheric mixing processes we don't fully understand. But those explanations require coincidences. Multiple rare events producing signatures that just happen to look like nuclear fission products. Occam's razor, which states that the simplest explanation is usually correct, cuts both ways. Is it simpler to posit unknown natural processes or to accept that Mars might have hosted a civilization that met a violent end? And if they did meet that end, who or what ended them? Brandenburg's hypothesis includes the possibility that the destruction was external, an attack from another civilization in the solar system or from beyond. The implications are staggering. It means we're in a dark forest scenario where advanced civilizations eliminate potential competitors before they become threats. It means 3E Atlas, if connected to that ancient conflict, might be a survivor, a weapon, or a warning. It means we're surrounded by the ruins of wars we can't comprehend, playing in a cosmic graveyard, ignorant of the forces that shape the very planets we're beginning to explore. Or it means Brandenburg is wrong. The isotopic signatures have prosaic explanations. Mars never hosted intelligent life, and 3E Atlas's trajectory past the red planet is genuinely coincidental. A random alignment in an infinite cosmos where every trajectory passes close to something. But even if Brandenburg is wrong about the cause, he's not wrong about the effects. Mars did lose its atmosphere catastrophically in geological terms. Mars did have liquid water and potentially habitable conditions. Mars is silent now, red and dead and haunting in its emptiness. And 3I Atlas chose or happened to pass closer to Mars than to any other planet in our system that demands explanation beyond shrugs and appeals to chance. The gamma-ray evidence is particularly intriguing. NASA's Fermi Gamma-ray telescope and other instruments have mapped the gamma-ray sky, detecting emissions from supernovae, black holes, quasars, and other high-energy sources. Mars shows gamma-ray emissions consistent with natural radioactive decay in its crust. But some researchers have noted anomalies, hotspots that don't align perfectly with known geological features. These could be measurement errors, artifacts of observation angles, or they could be remnants of energy releases from events millions of years past. Gamma rays from nuclear detonations would have dissipated long ago. But the daughter isotopes created in those detonations persist, continuing to emit characteristic signatures. If 3 Atlas detected these signatures from interstellar space, and if its sensors are sophisticated enough to map isotopic distributions from distances measured in light years, then targeting Mars makes sense. Return to the world that sent you, the world that might still have recoverable data. dormant installations, genetic material preserved in subsurface ice, or in the deep regolith shielded from cosmic radiation. Retrieve what can be retrieved, awaken what can be awakened, or simply bear witness. Record the state of the home world and carry that information to whatever destination comes next. The close approach on October 3rd might have been more than observational. If 3 Atlas is transmitting, if it deployed smaller probes, as some remote viewers suggested, Mars is where they'd go, small enough to land, to enter underground caverns through lava tubes, to access sites of interest without detection by our rudimentary surface missions. We wouldn't see them on orbital images too small, too fast, too deliberately stealthy. We might see secondary effects, electromagnetic disturbances, unexplained dust plumes, changes in methane concentrations, but attributing those to alien probes rather than natural Martian processes requires a leap most scientists won't make. Cliff High's assertion that humans are Martian descendants ties into panspermia theories that have gained traction in recent years. If Martian microbes reached Earth via meteorites, a process we know occurs because we found Martian rocks on Earth ejected by ancient impacts. And if those microbes seeded early Earth, then Martian and terrestrial life share a common origin. We're cousins separated by millions of years and planetary environments but related. If Martian life evolved intelligence first, if they achieved spaceflight, if they recognized their world was dying and sent genetic material, or even small populations to Earth, then we're not just related, we're descended. The legacy of Mars lives in us, in our DNA, in the drive to explore and expand that pushes us back toward the red planet, as if answering an ancestral call. This is speculative, hovering on the edge of what evidence allows, but it's not baseless. The genetic code, all terrestrial life shares, DNA and RNA structures appear remarkably well optimized, almost as if designed rather than evolved through random mutation and selection. Panspermia, whether natural or directed, offers an explanation for how life could appear on Earth relatively quickly after the planet cooled enough to allow liquid water, bypassing the immense improbabilities of abiogenesis, life arising from non-living chemistry. If Mars seeded Earth and if 3D Atlas is checking on that ancient intervention, then its trajectory and behaviour make perfect sense. It's not visiting, it's returning. The Mars flyby represents a missed opportunity of historic proportions. We had 6 spacecraft in Martian orbit, multiple surface assets, advanced warning of the object's arrival, and we captured 1 blurry GIF and a handful of amateur-processed images, the data we needed, high-resolution spectroscopy during closest approach, radio monitoring for any transmissions, magnetometer readings to check for artificial electromagnetic signatures, infrared mapping to detect heat sources. None of it was prioritized, or, if it was, hasn't been released. We're learning about 3E Atlas through absence, through what we're not being told, through gaps in the narrative that hint at either incompetence or intent. And Mars itself remains silent, offering no answers, only more questions. A world that might have harboured life, might have seen intelligence rise and fall, might be the origin point for humanity itself, and might be the destination or waypoint for an interstellar object that chose or was guided to pass within whispering distance of its red deserts. As 3 Atlas continues outward, racing toward its rendezvous with Jupiter and eventual exit from our solar system, Mars recedes in its trajectory, but the connection, the possibility, the implications linger. We can't unknow what we've glimpsed, can't unthink the thoughts that ancient civilization and current visitor might be part of the same story. A story that includes us, whether we're ready for that inclusion or not. Chapter 3. The Deep State Scenario, October 1st, 2025. The United States government shuts down due to congressional deadlock over healthcare subsidies and tax policy. 15000 NASA employees are furrowed. The agency's website stops updating. Communication offices go dark, or 2 days later. 3E Atlas makes its closest approach to Mars, offering the best observation opportunity of an interstellar object in human history. The timing is so perfectly awful that it invites suspicion. Is this incompetence? The usual dysfunction of bureaucratic government? Or is this something more calculated? A convenient excuse to delay or suppress information about what was actually observed. Conspiracy circles have been ablaze since July, when 3E Atlas was first detected, with theories ranging from the plausible to the paranoid. But strip away the most extreme claims, and you're left with questions that don't have satisfying official answers. Why did the shutdown happen when it did? Why was data from Mars orbiters withheld for days when ESA, which isn't subject to US political theatre, also delayed release? Why did Congresswoman Anna Paulina Luna have to personally intervene with NASA Director Patrick Duffy to ensure telescopes were even pointed at 3 Atlas during the Mars flyby? And perhaps most unsettling, why is the insurance industry, which typically models every conceivable risk from hurricanes to solar flares, remained completely silent on the cosmic threat implications of an anomalous interstellar object? The deep state scenario, as articulated by various researchers and whistleblowers, suggests that 3E is being used as a manufactured crisis. A false flag event designed to justify extraordinary measures. Global lockdowns, resource nationalization, martial law implementation, consolidation of power under emergency protocols. The playbook isn't new. Governments have historically used external threats, real or perceived, to expand authority and curtail freedoms. The question isn't whether this happens, history proves it does, but whether 3 Atlas represents such an opportunity and whether elements within government and intelligence communities are preparing to exploit it. Let's examine the shutdown itself. The official narrative is gridlock over domestic policy, Democrats and Republicans unable to compromise on spending bills. But the shutdown began on October 1st, precisely when preparation for Mars observation should have been intensifying. Data processing pipelines needed to be ready. Communication strategies established. Scientific teams coordinating across agencies and nations. Instead, chaos. NASA employees locked out of systems, unable to access observation schedules, unable to communicate findings. Even routine operations that normally continue during shutdowns, like mission control for active spacecraft, were disrupted. Then, on August 28th, months before the shutdown, President Biden signed an executive order redirecting NASA as a national intelligence and security agency. The public justification was vague, something about coordinating space threat assessment and protecting critical infrastructure. But the practical effect is that NASA's data and operations now fall under national security classification protocols. Information about what NASA observes, particularly regarding potential threats, can be withheld from the public indefinitely under the rubric of protecting national security. Convenient timing. Wouldn't you say reclassify NASA months before an anomalous interstellar object reaches its critical observation window, then shut down public-facing operations during that window, ensuring that whatever's learned remains controlled, filtered, spun, or buried depending on what serves the agenda? On September 30th, the day before the shutdown, over 800 flag officers, generals, and admirals from all branches of the US military were summoned to Quantico Marine Corps Base. The official reason? A routine briefing, but 800 flag officers don't assemble for routine anything. That's the brass. The decision makers, the people who would need to be coordinated if a crisis response was being planned. Some researchers have connected this gathering to the recent redesignation of the Department of Defense as the Department of War. A name change that sounds archaic but signals a shift in posture from defensive to offensive preparedness. What were they briefed on? We don't know. But the timing. One day before NASA goes dark, 2 days before 3E Atlas reaches Mars, suggests the briefing concern the object, perhaps intelligence assessments about its nature, perhaps military contingencies if it proves hostile, perhaps coordination with international partners, or perhaps, and this is where it gets dark, coordination on how to manage public perception and maintain order. If 3 Atlas turns out to be exactly what some fear it is, a craft, a probe, a precursor to contact or conflict, the insurance industry's silence is particularly telling. Insurance companies employ armies of acties whose job is to model risk and price policies accordingly. They assess hurricanes, earthquakes, pandemics, solar flares, anything that could cause widespread damage. They've even begun factoring climate change into long-term models. Yet 3I Atlas, an object that a Harvard astrophysicist ranks as having a 40% chance of technological origin, an object whose trajectory brings it through our solar system in a way that some models suggest could allow deployment of Earthbound probes, has generated zero public response from the insurance sector. No white papers, no risk assessments, no premium adjustments for cosmic threat exposure. This could mean they've assessed 3I Atlas as negligible risk, just a comet, nothing to worry about. Or it could mean they've been advised quietly through channels that don't leave paper trails, that discussing 3I Atlas publicly isn't in anyone's interest, create panic, trigger market instability, cause economic disruption that dwarfs any actual physical threat the object might pose. Keep it quiet, keep it controlled, let the public believe it's just another space rock. If something happens, we'll deal with it then. But until it does, maintain the illusion of normally. This is where the false flag theories gain traction. If you wanted to stage an alien invasion, not a real one, but a perceived one, how would you do it? You'd need a plausible extraterrestrial threat, something ambiguous enough that you could spin it either way depending on what narrative serves your purposes. 3 Atlas with its anomalies and unknowns fits perfectly. You'd need control over information channels, ensuring that only approved interpretations reach the public. The NASA reclassification and shutdown accomplish that. You'd need military readiness without public alarm, a mobilization disguised as routine exercises. The Quantico briefing checks that box, and you'd need a mechanism for implementing emergency powers, lockdowns, curfews, movement restrictions framed as necessary response to an unprecedented threat. Executive orders granting such authority already exist, drafted after 9/11s and updated periodically. Project Bluebeam, a conspiracy theory dating back to the 1990s, posits exactly this scenario. A staged alien contact event using advanced holographic technology and psychological operations to convince the global population that extraterrestrials are either invading or offering salvation, thereby justifying the creation of a one-world government to respond. Most researchers dismiss Bluebeam as too elaborate, requiring technologies and coordination beyond any government's capability. But elements of the theory, using an external threat to drive political consolidation, are standard geopolitical tactics. You don't need holograms if you have an actual interstellar object that's legitimately anomalous. You just need to control how that object is interpreted and presented. David Wilcock, a researcher and whistleblower who's gained a following for discussing insider information from alleged government sources, has been warning about staged alien invasion scenarios for years. His sources describe multiple contingency plans involving Dyson spheres, massive artificial structures that could be framed as hostile megastructures, and incoming objects like 3E Atlas that could be used as the MacGuffin for a SCOP. According to these sources, the goal isn't to hide the existence of extraterrestrial intelligence. That secret is already leaking through multiple channels, but to frame first contact in a way that benefits existing power structures, make it a threat rather than an opportunity, a crisis requiring centralized response rather than a revelation that might decentralize authority as people look to the cosmos rather than to governments. The timing of 3U2 Atlas's discovery and approach is also suspicious to some analysts. July 2025, during a period of global political instability, economic stress, declining trust in institutions, rising nationalism alongside pushes for international governance. The object arrives not during a period of unity and preparedness, but during fragmentation and distraction. If you wanted to exploit a cosmic event for political purposes, you'd want the population off balance, uncertain, looking for someone to provide answers and security. The pandemic playbook from 2020 demonstrated how quickly populations can be conditioned to accept restrictions on movement, commerce, and assembly when presented with a threat that's invisible, poorly understood, and framed as existential. 3 Atlas offers a similar dynamic, invisible to most people without telescopes, poorly understood even by experts, and potentially existential if it's what Lowe and others suggest it might be. But let's steelman the opposite position. Maybe the shutdown was just bad timing, a consequence of political dysfunction that has nothing to do with 3 Atlas. Maybe NASA's reclassification was motivated by legitimate concerns about space-based threats from anti-satellite weapons to asteroid impact risks. And the timing relative to 3I Atlas is coincidental. Maybe the Quantico briefing covered a dozen unrelated topics, and the 800 flag officers were discussing budget allocations or strategic posture regarding terrestrial conflicts. Maybe the insurance industry is silent because their models show negligible risk, or because they're simply not tracking astronomical events that don't have historical precedent for causing insured losses. These explanations are plausible. Government incompetence is far more common than government conspiracy. Agencies fail to coordinate. Communication breaks down. Important events slip through cracks in bureaucracy. The shutdown affecting NASA's ability to respond to 3I-8S might be exactly what it looks like. A series of unfortunate but unconnected decisions. And yet the pattern persists when you examine the sequence of events. The August executive order, the September military briefing, the October shutdown, the delayed data release, the coordinated silence across multiple national space agencies, the lack of insurance sector response. You see either an improbable series of coincidences or a coordinated effort to control information and prepare for contingencies the public isn't being told about. Hayville, when asked whether he believes NASA and other agencies know more than they're sharing, responded clearly, no. He attributes the delays to terrestrial stupidity rather than extraterrestrial intelligence. In his view, the shutdown and subsequent information vacuum represents human dysfunction, not human conspiracy. But Lowe is an optimist in some ways, believing that scientific institutions, however flawed, ultimately serve the truth. Others are less charitable, pointing to historical examples of governments withholding information about unidentified aerial phenomena, about nuclear close calls, about intelligence assessments that contradict public statements. The question becomes, if they are hiding something, what would it be? One possibility is that the Mars flyby images showed something unambiguous. Structures on 3 Atlas that are clearly artificial, smaller probes being released, course corrections that can't be explained by outgassing or gravity, releasing that information without preparation, without a framework for public understanding, without international coordination on response could cause panic. Markets could crash as people question whether economic planning means anything in the face of potential alien contact. Religious institutions could fracture as doctrines confront realities they didn't anticipate. Social order could erode as people decide that societal rules don't matter if we're on the brink of cosmic intervention. All the images showed nothing unusual, confirming 3I Atlas is just a weird comet and the withholding of data is about bureaucratic processes running slowly, not about content too sensitive to release. In this scenario, The conspiracy theorists are reading patterns into noise, seeing coordination where there's only chaos, attributing to malice what's adequately explained by mediocrity. The truth, as always, likely sits somewhere between these poles. Some information is being withheld, but not because it's proof of aliens, rather because releasing preliminary data that might be misinterpreted is seen as more risky than delaying until conclusions are certain. What's undeniable is that the public is hungry for information, and in the absence of official transparency, alternative narratives flourish. Congresswoman Luna's direct intervention highlights this. She represents a district in Florida, home to Kennedy Space Center, with constituents who care deeply about space exploration. When NASA went silent during the shutdown, she picked up the phone, called the director, and demanded that resources be allocated to observe 3I Atlas. Her action resulted in telescopes being repositioned and data being captured that otherwise might not have been. This is civilian oversight working, an elected representative ensuring that agencies serve public interest, even when institutional inertia or opaque priorities threaten to derail important work. But Luna is one voice, and her influence limited. If elements within NASA, the military or intelligence community, wanted to suppress findings about 3 Atlas, a single congresswoman couldn't stop them. Classification protocols, national security restrictions, interagency agreements that supersede congressional oversight, all provide mechanisms for keeping secrets. The public would be told what's safe to know or what's convenient to reveal, and the rest would remain behind closed doors until some future leak or deathbed confession brings it into light decades later. Elon Musk's silence on 3I Atlas is also curious. He owns SpaceX, operates thousands of Starlink satellites, has aspirations for Mars colonization, and regularly comments on astronomical events in space policy. Yet he said nothing publicly about 3I Atlas, despite it being arguably the most significant astronomical event of the decade. This could be because he's assessed it as unimportant, just a comet, not worth his attention. Or it could be because he's been advised that engaging with the topic isn't helpful, that it might spread concern or give oxygen to conspiracy theories. Or more intriguingly, because he knows more than he's saying, having access through SpaceX contracts and security clearances to information that's not public, and he's concluded that silence serves his interests better than commentary. The false flag scenario, the idea that 3 Atlas could be used to justify a pre-planned agenda, doesn't require the object itself to be fake. It just requires that the response to the object be manipulated, that genuine uncertainty and legitimate concern be weaponized for political purposes. If 3I Atlas does nothing, just passes through and exits the measures put in place, the surveillance, the emergency powers, the international coordination structures, they don't go away. They become normalized, part of the architecture of control that remains long after the crisis that justified them has passed. This is the game theory of crisis exploitation. Create or allow conditions where a crisis seems imminent, implement measures to address that crisis, and then maintain those measures indefinitely because the possibility of future crisis always exists. It's how temporary wartime measures become permanent features of governance. How emergency powers become standard operating procedure. 3I8 less, whether it's a comet or a craft, provides cover for adjustments to global governance structures, for surveillance expansion, for military mobilization that might face resistance if proposed without an external justification. Or, and we have to keep this possibility in view, maybe the people preparing are doing exactly what they should be doing. Maybe assessing an anomalous interstellar object as a potential threat, classifying data until it's certain, mobilizing military leadership to discuss contingencies, preparing emergency response frameworks in case worst-case scenarios unfold is prudent crisis management. Maybe we should be grateful that someone is taking 3E Atlas seriously, even if that seriousness manifests as secrecy and control rather than transparency and public engagement. The challenge is that from the outside, competent preparation and malicious exploitation look identical until outcomes reveal intent, and by then it's often too late to resist if the intent was malicious. What happens next will clarify much. When 3.2 Atlas re-emerges from behind the sun in December, when it's observable again, when additional data comes in, we'll see whether the agencies and institutions withholding information now release it, whether explanations are offered, whether the public is brought into the loop or kept in the dark. If transparency returns, if we get detailed imagery and honest assessments of what 3.2 Atlas is and what it means, then the delay can be attributed to normal processes, however frustrating, if the silence continues. If data remains classified, if only sanitized summaries are released while critical details stay hidden, then the questions about deep state agendas and false flag preparations become harder to dismiss. December will tell us not just about 3 Atlas, but about the kind of world we're living in, one where governments serve their people's right to know, or one where governments serve interests that require people remain ignorant, compliant, and controlled. Chapter 4. The Secret Space Programs. What if 3I Atlas isn't arriving from interstellar space, but returning from a mission that began decades or even centuries ago? What if the object isn't foreign, but familiar, not alien, but human, or at least connected to human history in ways that official narratives don't acknowledge? This possibility sounds like science fiction until you examine the persistent testimonies of whistleblowers, the curious gaps in space program documentation, and the technological anomalies that suggest our capabilities in space might extend far beyond the public frontier. Solar Warden. The name appears in declassified documents and testimony from military and intelligence personnel in the claims of hackers who allegedly accessed classified networks. The story goes that in the 1980s, following decades of covert collaboration with extraterrestrial civilizations, or recovered technology from crash retrieval programs, the United States and allied nations developed a secret space fleet. Not satellites, not space shuttles, but actual naval equivalent vessels capable of operating beyond Earth orbit, conducting long-duration missions to the outer solar system and potentially to nearby star systems. The testimonies are numerous enough that dismissing all of them requires assuming a coordinated hoax or mass delusion. Gary McKinnon, the British hacker who breached US military networks in the early 2000s, claims he saw spreadsheets listing non-terrestrial officers, fleet-to-fleet transfers, and ship names that didn't correspond to any known Navy or Air Force vessels. He was nearly extradited to face charges that could have resulted in decades in prison, suggesting the breaches touched something genuinely sensitive. His descriptions of what he found, clean energy technologies, anti-gravity propulsion systems, evidence of structures on the Moon and Mars align with other whistleblower accounts despite having no contact with those sources. Corey Goode, another figure in this space, claims he served in a secret space program for 20 years, participating in missions that involve travel to Mars, interactions with multiple extraterrestrial species, and operations across the solar system. His testimony includes details about alliances between human factions and Nordic or Pleiadian civilizations. Beings described as humanoid, tall, fair-featured, technologically advanced, but philosophically aligned with principles of non-inference and gradual awakening of humanity's consciousness. Goode's accounts are impossible to verify, tainted by associations with individuals promoting dubious spiritual doctrines. but elements of his testimony match other sources, suggesting either a shared mythology or shared experiences within a hidden program. The theory connecting 3 Atlas to Solar Warden or similar programs posits that the object was launched decades ago, possibly in the 1960s during the height of Cold War space race secrecy, on a mission to explore interstellar space, scout for habitable worlds, or establish contact with civilizations detected through radio astronomy. Using propulsion technologies not publicly acknowledged, fusion drives or more exotic systems that don't require propellant in the conventional sense. The craft achieved velocities that make it appear to be arriving from interstellar origins when in fact it's been looping through the outer solar system or nearby stellar neighborhood and is now returning. Why return now? Perhaps the mission parameters included a scheduled homecoming. Perhaps the craft detected something requiring Earth be alerted. A threat, an opportunity, information gathered during its journey that mission controllers need to integrate into strategic planning. Perhaps something went wrong and the craft is limping home, damaged or depleted, unable to complete its mission and seeking recovery. Or perhaps this is all part of a controlled disclosure strategy where the craft's return allows the secret space program's existence to be revealed gradually, framed as a discovery rather than an admission, avoiding the political fallout of acknowledging decades of lies and hidden expenditures. The precision of 3 Atlas's trajectory supports this hypothesis. Its path through the inner solar system aligning closely with planetary orbits passing near Mars and Jupiter could reflect deliberate navigation rather than random cosmic trajectory. His metallic emissions, the pure nickel without iron, might not be natural outgassing, but exhaust from propulsion systems. Fusion or fission reactions generating specific isotopic signatures that appear anomalous when analysed through the lens of cometry science. Its lack of a traditional tail, the forward glow that appears in Hubble images could be thrust plume rather than solar radiation heating ice. The Nordic or Pleiadian connection adds another layer. Multiple contact and abductee testimonies over decades describe encounters with beings fitting this description, claiming to be from star systems in the Pleiades cluster, roughly 400 to 450 light-years from Earth. They typically present themselves as benevolent, concerned about humanity's development, particularly our nuclear weapons and environmental destruction, offering warnings and guidance. If such a civilization exists and has been monitoring Earth, collaborating covertly with human governments or military factions, then 3 Atlas could be a joint operation. A probe designed and crewed by both human and Nordic personnel sent out to gather data, and now returning to share findings. This scenario has the advantage of explaining why governments are treating 3 Atlas with a mixture of secrecy and concern. If it's one of ours, or partially ours, then acknowledging its true nature means admitting to programs that were never authorized by Congress, funded through black budgets and off-book operations, involving technologies that would revolutionize energy and transportation if released, but would also destabilize economies built on fossil fuels and conventional aerospace. The economic, political, and social disruptions would be immense, and the people currently benefiting from existing power structures have strong incentives to prevent or at least control that disruption. Red Sky is another program name that appears in similar contexts, sometimes described as an earlier iteration or a parallel operation to Solar Warden. The details are murkier, but the general claim is that starting in the 1950s, after the Roswell incident and other alleged crash retrievals, the United States began reverse engineering extraterrestrial technology, achieving breakthroughs in propulsion, material science, and energy generation. By the 1970s, these technologies were sufficiently mature to enable crewed missions beyond the Moon. The Apollo program in this narrative was a limited hangout showing the public a primitive version of our space capabilities, while the real exploration happened in secret, using craft that didn't need chemical rockets. The Apollo 20 mission, allegedly conducted in 1976 but never officially acknowledged, is said to have landed on the Moon's far side to investigate a crashed spacecraft visible in orbital photographs. The crew reportedly found a large elongated object partially buried with features suggesting artificial construction. Some of the descriptions: cigar-shaped segmented hull, a metallic composition, matched descriptions of 3E Atlas, leading to speculation that what crashed on the Moon and what's passing through our solar system now are the same type of craft, possibly from the same civilizational program. The alleged Apollo 20 footage, leaked online and disputed as either authentic or sophisticated hoax, shows interior exploration of this crashed vessel with glimpses of technology, and even a preserved being in what appears to be suspended animation. If this is true, if we recovered a craft on the Moon, reverse-engineered it, sent out our own version, and that version is now returning, then 3 Atlas represents the culmination of a century-long arc of secret aerospace development. It also means that contact with extraterrestrial intelligence didn't begin with 3 Atlas's arrival in 2025, but potentially began decades ago with crashes, retrievals, negotiations, and collaborations that the public has never been informed about. The UFO disclosure movement, the Pentagon's acknowledgement of unidentified aerial phenomena, the establishment of task forces and formal investigations could all be steps toward preparing the public for revelations about programs like Solar Warden and objects like 3's Atlas. John Vivano, a metaphysical researcher and show host, has offered a more complex narrative involving competing extraterrestrial factions and secret space programs caught in the middle. According to his sources, which include alleged insiders and contactees, 3 Atlas is controlled by reptilian extraterrestrials, beings often described in ancient mythology and modern alien encounter literature as hostile or at least self-interested, operating from a survival and dominance paradigm. These beings are supposedly engaged in a conflict with Nordic or Pleiadian factions and others over control of Earth and its population, viewing humans as a resource to be managed rather than a species to be uplifted. In this model, Solar Warden and similar programs exist partly to defend Earth's interests in this broader conflict, operating as a kind of cosmic coast guard, monitoring solar system traffic, intercepting unauthorized intrusions, and negotiating with various extraterrestrial powers to maintain a degree of human autonomy. 3I-8 LS arriving now represents either an escalation by reptilian forces, a reconnaissance mission testing Earth's defenses, or an attempt to re-establish contact with assets or agents they have on or beneath Earth's surface. The October Mars flyby might have been to check on Martian installations or underground facilities that date back to when Mars was habitable, ensuring those assets remain operational or retrievable. This narrative is impossible to prove or disprove with available evidence, sitting squarely in the realm of testimony without verification, but it offers an explanation for why multiple governments seem simultaneously concerned and unprepared regarding 3 Atlas. If it's part of a known conflict, an expected development in an ongoing situation, then the response reflects strategic positioning rather than discovery. If it's unknown, genuinely unexpected despite decades of alleged secret space operations, then it suggests either those programs don't exist or they've been blindsided by something outside their intelligence networks. Another perspective comes from researchers examining the Galactic Federation concept, the idea that advanced civilizations form cooperative networks for mutual benefit and cosmic governance. In this model, 3-2 Atlas isn't a single civilization's probe, but a way station, a mobile platform that multiple civilizations use for docking, repairs, data exchange, and coordination. Remote viewers describing reptilian, avian, and crystalline entities, all present on the object, fits this multicultural space station concept. The object arrives at our solar system, not to interact with Earth specifically, but because we're a convenient stopping point on routes connecting more significant destinations, the cosmic equivalent of a rest stop on an interstellar highway. If human secret space programs have achieved interstellar capability, even if only to nearby stars or the Oort cloud, they would likely encounter these Federation way station craft. Initial contact might have been decades ago, leading to negotiations about Earth's status, our admission or exclusion from Federation politics, the rules governing our development and their intervention. 3-2 Atlas's current passage could represent a scheduled inspection, a delegation checking on how Earth is progressing, whether we've met benchmarks for technological and social development that would qualify us for broader cosmic community participation. The exhaust signature analysis is worth examining more closely. 3-2 Atlas is losing mass. We know this from Hubble observation showing material leaving the object toward the Sun, but the trajectory isn't changing, which requires the mass loss to be either symmetric, balanced equally in all directions, so the net force is zero, or the object is so massive that the thrust from outgassing is negligible. A Loeb calculated the mass must exceed 33 billion tons to make the math work with natural outgassing. But if the emissions aren't outgassing but controlled propulsion, fusion drives or ion engines or something more exotic, then the thrust could be directional, providing small course corrections that maintain the precise trajectory we're observing. This would require active systems intelligence control, exactly what you'd expect from a crewed or AI-managed spacecraft. The chemical composition adds weight here. Pure nickel emission without iron is chemically bizarre for a comet where you'd expect a mix reflecting stellar nuclear synthesis ratios, but for a fusion reactor using specific isotopes, the byproducts would reflect the fuel and reaction pathway, potentially producing nickel-dominant emissions. Some advanced fusion concepts use nickel isotopes. And while we haven't mastered those reactions on Earth, a civilization with centuries or millennium or development certainly could. The absence of iron might not be an anomaly requiring explanation, but a signature identifying the propulsion system type. A fingerprint that says, this is technology, this is controlled. The timeline for a Solar Warden mission launched in the 1960s or 7S, and returning now requires velocities of around 1 to 5% light speed, depending on distance travelled. That's beyond anything publicly acknowledged, but within theoretical reach of fusion pulse propulsion, antimatter catalyzed fusion, or other concepts that appear in classified research. The journey time would be decades, requiring either suspended animation for crew, multi-generational ship design, or AI control with minimal or no organic crew. The fact that 3E Atlas shows no obvious signs of damage, no tumbling or uncontrolled venting, suggests either it's remarkably resilient or it's been actively maintained during its journey, implying functional systems. If this is one of ours coming home, then someone on Earth knows mission control somewhere buried in a mountain or desert facility has been tracking it, receiving telemetry, possibly even communicating with whatever or whoever is aboard the shutdown. The secrecy, the delayed data release, they're not about hiding an unknown, but about controlling revelation of unknown, deciding how and when to admit that we've been in space, really in space for decades, that the technologies exist to solve energy crises, to enable interstellar exploration, to transform civilization, but have been kept secret for reasons of power, profit, and control. The emotional weight of this possibility is significant. If true, it means every astronaut who risked their life on chemical rockets, every scientist told that faster-than-light travel is impossible, every visionary ridiculed for suggesting we could do more than we claim. They were right, and the suppression has been deliberate. It means the technology is to prevent climate catastrophe, to lift billions from energy poverty, to explore the cosmos. They exist but are hoarded by a cabal that profits from scarcity and limits. It means the wonder and inspiration that space exploration generates has been artificially constrained, the frontier kept just beyond reach to maintain dependence on Earth-based power structures. But it also might mean that revelation is coming. 3i8LAS, whether it's a secret space program craft or not, is forcing conversations about what's possible, what's hidden, what we're capable of. Its anomalies can't be fully explained by conventional comet science, creating cognitive dissonance that opens minds to alternatives. If disclosure is a process, not an event, then 3e-Atlas serves as a catalyst, a data point too significant to ignore, pushing the needle from speculation toward confirmation. And if that confirmation comes, if we learn that objects like this are ours, have been ours, the question becomes not what it is, but what we do with that knowledge. The Nordic alliance aspect, if real, suggests that humanity isn't alone in resisting negative extraterrestrial influence. The reptilian versus Nordic conflict narrative, stripped of its loaded terminology, describes a common theme in exopolitics research: factions with different philosophies about intervention, control versus freedom, domination versus cooperation. Nordics supposedly advocate for humanity's sovereignty and gradual awakening, sharing technology and guidance, but not imposing control, reptilians, or whatever they actually are. Reportedly operate from hierarchical power structures where might makes right and the strong dominate the weak. These aren't moral judgments, but strategic orientations and secret space programs allying with Nordic factions would reflect a choice about what kind of cosmos we want to inhabit and what kind of civilization we want to become. 3i-Atlas passing through our solar system might be a test of that choice. Are we aware enough to recognize what we're looking at? Are we unified enough to respond coherently? Are we mature enough to handle the truth? Whatever it is, or are we still fragmenting into tribal factions, more concerned with who controls the narrative than with what the narrative reveals the secret space programs? If they exist, operate in a paradigm where these questions have been answered through action. They've made contact, they've negotiated, they've chosen sides. The rest of humanity kept ignorant hasn't had the opportunity. 3Atlas offers it now, a chance to look up, to ask the hard questions, to demand transparency, and to accept that the universe we thought we knew is smaller, younger, and less informed than the universe that actually exists. The interstellar way station concept deserves deeper consideration because it resolves several paradoxes. If 3Atlas is massive, km in scale, housing multiple species, serving as a mobile base for operations across stellar distances, then its trajectory through our solar system isn't about Earth at all. We're incidental background, a primitive civilization on a backwater world that happens to be near a useful refueling or data exchange point. The remote viewers perceiving crowded interiors, multiple entities, sophisticated facilities. They're seeing a living space station, a cosmic embassy where different civilizations collaborate on projects that span galaxies and timescales we can barely conceive. In this scenario, Solar Warden or equivalent human programs have already made contact with these way station craft, established protocols for approach and communication, perhaps even sent personnel aboard for exchanges. The secrecy surrounds not the existence of 3i-Atlas. but humanity's involvement with it. The fact that we've been participating in a broader cosmic community while the public is told we're alone, that interstellar travel is centuries away, that contact remains hypothetical. Revealing this would require explaining why the secrecy, where the technologies came from, what agreements have been made, and who authorized decisions that affect all of humanity but were made by unelected elements within military and intelligence structures. The return of 3 Iatalis then isn't an arrival, but a scheduled visit, a checkpoint in an ongoing relationship. The reason for heightened alert might be that this visit includes something new, a delegation requesting something, an assessment being conducted, a decision point where humanity's trajectory will be influenced by outcomes of negotiations the public doesn't know are happening. The government shutdown and information control ensure that whatever transpires during 3I Atlas's passage remains manageable, interpretable, spun to fit narratives that don't threaten existing structures, even as they acknowledge new realities. This is perhaps the most unsettling version of the secret space program hypothesis. Not that we're encountering aliens for the first time, but that we've been encountering them all along. And the gatekeepers of that knowledge have decided that we, the collective humanity, can't be trusted with the truth, that our reactions would be too unpredictable, our demands for change too disruptive, our recognition of being lied to too destabilizing for institutions that depend on our compliance and belief in their legitimacy. 3 Atlas becomes a mirror held up not to show us aliens, but to show us ourselves, a species capable of incredible ingenuity and exploration, but also capable of profound deception and control, a species reaching for the stars while chains of secrecy hold most of us to the ground. Chapter 5. Prophetic Visions and Timelines. December 2025. The month keeps appearing in visions, in remote viewing sessions, in channel-nailed messages, in prophetic warnings from sources ranging from intelligence analysts to spiritual mediums, not as vague future date, but as specific conversions point, a moment when something shifts, when timelines fork, when the probability waves that quantum mechanics describes collapse into definite outcomes. What makes December so significant? 3 Atlas re-emerges from behind the sun, becoming visible again to Earth-based observers, entering the window where any activity, any deployment, any signal would be detectable. But the prophetic focus suggests more than astronomical positioning. It suggests an event, a choice, a revelation that changes everything. The Future Forecasting Group, which employs trained remote viewers to explore probable futures rather than present or past targets, conducted extensive sessions on 3I Atlas, and consistently encountered apocalyptic imagery. Not metaphorical destruction, but specific scenarios involving electromagnetic disruption, plasma events, atmospheric phenomena that don't fit natural weather patterns. Their viewers describe watching 3I Atlas release smaller objects at perihelion, dozens or hundreds of probe-sized craft that accelerate toward inner planets using the sun's gravity in reverse orth maneuvers, slingshotting inward at velocities conventional propulsion can't achieve. These smaller probes, according to the visions, don't impact Earth, but enter the magnetosphere, the protective bubble of Earth's magnetic field. Once there, they begin interacting with the plasma environment, the charged particles trapped in radiation belts, triggering cascading reactions that manifest as aurora-like displays across the entire planet, visible even at equatorial latitudes. Beautiful at first, mesmerizing. But then the effects intensify. Electronics fail not from direct EMP like a nuclear detonation, but from induced currents in long conductors. Power grids, communication networks, anything that spans distances. The disruption is selective, targeting infrastructure while leaving biological systems unaffected, suggesting precision rather than indiscriminate assault. The forecasters describe a fork point following this event. In one timeline branch, Humanity interprets the disruption as attack and responds with fear, activating military protocols, attempting to shoot down or disable the probes, escalating toward conflict with an adversary we don't understand and can't effectively resist. This path leads to further chaos, societal breakdown as systems remain offline, resource scarcity triggering conflicts, a thin veneer of civilization cracking under stress it wasn't designed to handle. Dark Forest scenario realized contact equals catastrophe because we treated it as war from the moment it began. In the other timeline branch, the disruption is recognized as communication attempt or gift rather than attack. The selective nature of the electromagnetic interference, the fact that life support systems and medical equipment can be shielded while corrupt financial networks and surveillance apparatus cannot suggest intentional discrimination. Someone or something is resetting the board, clearing away technological dependence that's become toxic, forcing a return to more local, resilient, human-scale organization. In this branch, the initial panic gives way to adaptation, communities pulling together, old skills reviving, and when communication is restored, it's on different terms, less centralized, less controllable, more aligned with human well-being than corporate profit. Which path manifests depends on choices made in the immediate aftermath, particularly by those with power to shape narrative and direct response. If military leaders frame it as attack, populations will follow that framing. If scientists and diplomats frame it as contact, different options open. The forecasting suggests December is when this choice crystallizes, when 3i Atlas does whatever it's going to do, and our reaction determines which future we inhabit. This is heavy stuff. Probability theory, meeting prophecy, quantum superposition applied to social and political outcomes, but it gets weirder. Some remote viewers describe not just seeing the fork, but existing in both timelines simultaneously, experiencing the dissonance of contradictory futures overlapping. They report temporal bleed where events from December echo backward into previous months, creating precognitive awareness and sensitives who perceive the echo before the event that causes it occurs. This would explain why so many independent sources are converging on December without clear rational basis. They're perceiving effect before cause, the timeline for casting a shadow backward through time that manifests as prophetic certainty. Charisma Magazine, a publication serving Pentecostal and charismatic Christian communities, featured articles connecting 3i Atlas to end times prophecy, the biblical scenarios describing Earth's final days before divine judgment and renewal. The parallels are striking enough that even skeptics of religious interpretation acknowledge the pattern matching. Revelation describes signs in the heavens, stars falling to Earth, cosmic disturbances that accompany the return of Christ or the final conflict between good and evil. 3e Atlas appearing in the sky, visible to all nations, exhibiting behaviors that can't be explained by natural law fits the archetype. The end times interpretation doesn't necessarily mean literal apocalypse. In theological terms, apocalypse means revelation, unveiling, the hidden made manifest. 3e Atlas as apocalypse could mean it reveals truths that end one age and begin another. That the unveiling of extraterrestrial intelligence or advanced human space programs or ancient Martian connections represents such paradigm disruption that the world after can't resemble the world before. Prophecy becomes self-fulfilling not through supernatural intervention, but through the psychological and social transformations that occur when core beliefs about our place in the universe are overturned. Some prophetic voices within Christian communities describe 3e Atlas as divine intervention vessel. Technology so advanced it appears miraculous, operated by beings that fulfill angelic functions, even if their origin is extraterrestrial rather than supernatural. The message received through CERN portal, according to Sebastian Martin's testimony, "We come in peace to gather the star seeds," aligns with biblical harvest imagery where wheat is separated from chaff, where the faithful are gathered while the corrupt system collapses. Whether you interpret this literally as rapture-type event or metaphorically as consciousness evolution, separating those ready for awakening from those trapped in old paradigms, the structure matches prophetic frameworks thousands of years old. The light-based orbs that remote viewers and prophetic sources describe 3 Yahi Atlas releasing serve multiple purposes in these visions. On practical level, they're described as neutralizing black budget weapons, satellites equipped with directed energy systems, nuclear launch capabilities, technologies that could threaten the object or escalate conflict beyond recovery. But on metaphysical level, they're described as consciousness expansion tools, emitting frequencies that activate dormant DNA, stimulate pineal gland function, dissolve barriers between physical and non-physical perception. This is where hard science and esoteric spirituality blur, where claims become untestable because they involve subjective internal experiences that can't be measured by external instruments. The starseed concept requires unpacking. In New Age and contact literature, starseeds are souls or consciousness that incarnated on Earth from other planetary systems, choosing to experience human life to assist with Earth's evolution or to learn lessons available through physical density. They're described as feeling out of place, longing for home they can't quite remember, drawn to stars and space with inexplicable nostalgia. If 3 Atlas is here to gather starseeds, it implies a recognition system, an ability to identify which consciousnesses are stellar origin and which are terrestrially evolved, and an intention to either extract them, activate them, or simply acknowledge them. This sounds absurd through materialist lens, where consciousness is dephenomenon of brain chemistry and nothing exists beyond physical body. But through idealist lens, where consciousness is fundamental and physical reality emerges from it, the concepts make different sense. If consciousness can exist independent of biological substrate, then transfer between bodies, planets, even dimensional planes becomes theoretically possible. Starseeds would be consciousness that existed elsewhere, experienced life in different forms, and incarnated here for specific purposes. 3 Atlas. Recognizing them wouldn't require scanning DNA, but reading energetic signatures, patterns of awareness that differentiate experiential histories. Whether any of this is real or elaborate mythology doesn't change its function. These narratives give people framework for understanding anomalous experiences, for feeling connected to cosmos rather than isolated on Earth, for believing their lives have meaning beyond survival and reproduction. The prophecies about December, about consciousness expansion, about starseeds being gathered, they provide hope that current suffering isn't permanent, that change is coming, that the corrupt systems oppressing humanity are temporary and will be swept away by forces beyond their control. This is powerful psychologically, even if untrue empirically, because belief shapes behavior, and behavior shapes outcomes. The Galactic Federation station messages channeled through various sources, but notably the GFL station YouTube channel, emphasize positive interpretation of 3i Atlas. According to these transmissions, the object is broadcasting Lyron genetic codes, activational sequences that supercharge individuals carrying dormant extraterrestrial DNA or consciousness templates. Lions in this cosmology are among the oldest humanoid civilizations in our galaxy, ancestors to many current stellar cultures including Pleiadians and possibly ancient Martians. If LEN codes are being broadcast, it means reconnection with heritage, restoration of abilities and awareness that were suppressed or forgotten during Earth quarantine period, where we developed in isolation from broader galactic community. The channelers describe December as when these transmissions peak, when Earth's position relative to 3 Atlas creates optimal conditions for signal reception, and when individuals sufficiently open to the frequencies experience spontaneous upgrades in consciousness, healing of physical and psychological trauma, activation of psychic abilities, and reconnection with soul purpose. This is testable, at least individually, if thousands or millions of people report sudden transformations in December, if healing occurs at rates beyond statistical norms, if abilities manifest that weren't present before. But it's also unfalsifiable at collective level because subjective experiences can't be disproven, only believed or dismissed. George Kavasilis, another researcher in this space, frames 3 Atlas within narrative of Earth liberation from negative extraterrestrial control structures. He describes current global elites as puppets or hybrids serving off-world masters who've maintained Earth as prison planet, pharma, or experimental zone for millennia. The arrival of 3 Atlas represents intervention by benevolent factions. The White Hats in cosmic conflict here to dismantle control grids and free humanity to self-determine our path. The plasma events and electromagnetic disruptions would target the technological infrastructure of control, satellites surveilling us, financial networks binding us to debt slavery, communication systems feeding propaganda and division. This narrative empowers people to see themselves as part of liberation, rather than victims of circumstances beyond their control. It also provides clear enemies: the Cabal, the Deep State, negative ETS and clear allies, the Galactic Federation, Nordic races, 3 Atlas itself. The moral clarity is appealing after decades of murky geopolitics where everyone claims to be good and everyone accuses everyone else of evil. But moral clarity often oversimplifies, creating binaries where reality operates in spectrums, and the danger in prophetic narratives is they can justify an action waiting for external saviors rather than building solutions ourselves. The timeline fracturing concept deserves serious philosophical attention, even if its mechanics remain speculative. Quantum mechanics describes superposition where particles exist in multiple states simultaneously until observation collapses them into single outcome. Applied to macroscopic world, this suggests futures exist as probability clouds. Multiple versions playing out until decisions collapse probability into actuality. Remote viewers accessing these probability clouds would perceive multiple futures as equally real because in quantum sense they are, at least until the waveform collapse. If this is correct, then prophetic accuracy doesn't require seeing predetermined future, but perceiving high probability trajectories and communicating them backward through time to influence choices that determine which trajectory manifests. Prophecy becomes self-negating paradox. Accurate because it warns of what happens if nothing changes, but inaccurate if the warning prompts changes that avert the foreseen outcome. December as convergence point makes sense in this framework because it's when 3E Atlas is most observable, most active, when the object itself forces reality to choose which version of events will solidify into history. The 2027 date that Future Forecasting Group and others mention a secondary convergence extends this further. If December 2025 is first decision point, opening moves and contact scenario, then 2027 represents consequences crystallizing, the world that results from December choices becoming undeniable. Viewers describe 2027 as radically different depending on which timeline branch was taken. Either post-scarcity cooperative civilization or Mad Max resource wars. The gap between December 2025 and late 2027 allows time for initial decisions to cascade through systems, for dominoes to fall, for feedback loops to amplify small differences into massive divergences. What do we do with all this prophetic material? Dismiss it as wishful thinking, imagination filling unknowns with archetypes and hopes? Possible. But that doesn't explain the convergence across sources with no apparent communication, the specificity of December timeline, the correlation with astronomical events that weren't known when some prophecies were recorded. Take it literally as prediction of physical events. Dangerous. Because literal interpretation encourages passivity, waiting for external intervention rather than taking responsibility for shaping outcomes. Perhaps the middle path is recognizing these prophecies as mapping possibility space rather than predicting certainty as describing what could happen, depending on collective choices, as providing vision of potential futures that can inspire or warn. They're not script to be followed but scenarios to be considered, data points in risk assessment and hope cultivation. December will come whether we believe the prophecies or not, whether we prepare or ignore, whether we see 3i Alice as threat, gift, or irrelevance. What we choose to do with those perceptions determines which prophecy, if any, proves accurate. Not because the prophecy caused the outcome, but because our response to prophecy shaped the choices that led to outcome. Chapter 6. The Dark Forest Dilemma. Imagine the galaxy as forest at night, vast, ancient, full of life, but shrouded in darkness. Every civilization is hunter and prey simultaneously, aware that revealing position invites attention that might be hostile. The optimal strategy in such environment is silence, camouflage, moving carefully through the dark without making sound or light that draws predators. This is dark forest theory, Leshikin's elegant and terrifying solution to family's paradox. The question of why we haven't detected obvious signs of alien intelligence, despite the universe being old enough and large enough that intelligence should be common. The math is straightforward. Our galaxy contains approximately 200 billion stars, many with planets some percentage of those in habitable zones. Even conservative estimates of a bioenesis probability suggest millions of potentially life-bearing worlds. Life on Earth developed complexity and intelligence over billions of years. But the universe is nearly 14 billion years old, and our galaxy formed over 12 billion years ago. Civilizations that arose even a million years before us. A blink in cosmic time would have technological capabilities we can barely imagine. They should be visible, their engineering projects detectable, their signals pervading space. And yet we see nothing but silence, a great silence. Dark forest theory explains this through game theory. If you don't know whether another civilization is friendly or hostile, and if technological capability scales such that advanced civilizations can destroy primitive ones effortlessly, then any contact represents existential risk. You can't assess intentions from afar, can't negotiate from position of weakness, can't defend if you're outmatched. The safest strategy is remaining hidden, eliminating any civilization you do detect before they can detect you and potentially eliminate you first. The galaxy isn't empty, it's just that everyone who survived long enough learned to hide. This is where 3E becomes terrifying. If it's artificial, if it's probed from advanced civilization, its arrival breaks our camouflage. We're lit up, visible, known, and we have no idea what that means. Is 3 Atlas scout for invasion fleet assessing our defenses and resources? Is it first contact probe from civilization extending peaceful greeting? Or is it automated system executing programming determined so long ago that its craters no longer exist, following mission parameters that might not account for current realities? Avi has been explicit about this risk. He's developed what he calls the Loeb scale, ranking interstellar objects from 0, definitely natural, to 10, definitely technological, and imminently threatening. 3E Atlas sits at 4, meaning there's roughly 40% chance it's not of natural origin, significant enough that precautions are warranted, but not so high that panic is justified. But that ranking could change rapidly with new data. If 3 to Atlas releases smaller objects in December, if it alters course, if it transmits signals or exhibits behaviors impossible to explain naturally, the ranking jumps. At rank 8 and 9, we're talking about confirmed artificial object with unknown but potentially hostile intent. At rank 10, invasion is underway and defensive measures are imperative. The problem is we have no defenses worth mentioning. Our most advanced weapons, nuclear missiles, have range measured in thousands of km and speeds measured in kilometers. 3i Atlas is moving at 58 kilometers per s and will exit our solar system entirely within months. We can't intercept it, can't board it, can't disable it, can't even communicate with it effectively because we don't know its language, its protocols, its intentions. We're ants watching elephant walk through our colony hoping it doesn't step on us because we have no capacity to influence its path. NASA has proposed in context of asteroid defense using nuclear weapons to deflect incoming threats. The DART mission successfully demonstrated kinetic impact as deflection method, slamming spacecraft into asteroid to change its trajectory. But these strategies assume natural objects following predictable physics. If 3-2 Atlas is under intelligent control, if it can maneuver, if it has defenses, attempting to nuke it might be suicidal. Imagine detonating weapon near Scout from civilization capable of interstellar travel. Best case, they ignore our primitive aggression. Worst case, they interpret it as declaration of war and respond proportionally, which from their perspective might mean sterilizing the threat, us to prevent future conflict. The Dark Forest scenario isn't paranoia. It's risk assessment. We broadcast radio and television signals into space for over 80 years. Electromagnetic ripples announcing our presence to anyone listening within 80 light-year radius. Thousands of stars are within that sphere, some with confirmed planetary systems. If any of those systems host intelligent life, they know we're here. They've been watching our development, observing the spectroscopic signatures of industrial civilization, atmospheric composition changes indicating technological activity. They've had decades to prepare, to send scouts or probes or fleets, travelling at speeds we can't match, arriving precisely when we're vulnerable, developed enough to be interesting, but not so developed we can defend ourselves. 3i Atlas arriving now during this narrow window is either cosmic coincidence or cosmic calculation. We're at inflection point of species capable of space travel but barely capable of nuclear weapons, but not planetary defense connected globally by technology but politically fragmented and tribal. We're ripe for either uplifting by benevolent mentors or harvesting by efficient predators. We won't know which until it's too late to change the outcome. The United Nations has no protocol for this. In 2005, Congress tasked NASA with identifying 90% of space rocks larger than 140 m that could collide with Earth. Objects big enough to cause regional devastation if they impact. 3-2 Atlas is 40 times that size at minimum, potentially over 5000 m in diameter. It's not on collision course, but the same tracking and warning system should apply. Yet there's been no UN Security Council meeting, no emergency session, no global coordination on response strategy. Either the threat is assessed as negligible or the response is happening in classified channels where public can't observe or influence decisions being made on our behalf. Avibe has submitted white paper to UN urging creation of international committee focused on threats from interstellar objects, arguing that we need frameworks for assessment and response before crisis forces improvisation. His proposal includes full sky monitoring systems, observatories in both hemispheres capable of detecting and tracking objects as they approach, giving maximum warning time. He advocates for drastically increased funding, arguing that after first verified encounter with alien technology, budgets will need to increase by factor of 1,000 approaching global military spending levels because implications to world economy and security are that severe. The pushback against Lowe's proposals comes from multiple directions. Scientists argue he's fear-mongering, that 3 Atlas is almost certainly Comet, and diverting resources to alien defense scenarios waste money needed for real problems like climate change and pandemic preparedness. Politicians see proposals for massive new international bodies and monitoring systems as non-starters, requiring cooperation that doesn't exist, and funding that won't be allocated unless threat is imminent and obvious. And security establishments, military and intelligence services prefer keeping such capabilities classified if they exist at all, not wanting potential adversaries to know what we can or can't detect. But Lowe's point stands regardless of whether 3 Atlas specifically is threat. The universe is large and old. Probability of other intelligence existing is high, and our detection capabilities are improving rapidly. The Vera Rubin Observatory coming online in the next few years will image the entire visible sky repeatedly, detecting millions of objects per year, including potentially dozens of additional interstellar visitors. We're transitioning from era where interstellar objects are rare surprises to era where they're regular occurrences and each one requires assessment. Is it rock or ship, scout or weapon, natural or artificial? We need systems for answering these questions before one of them is weapon and we learn too late. The insurance industry's silence on cosmic risk is particularly troubling when viewed through dark forest lens. Insurance exists to price and distribute risk to prepare for low probability, high consequence events, asteroid impact, supervolcano eruption, solar superstorm. These are all modelled and priced into various policies and investment strategies. But first, contact with alien intelligence potentially hostile that represents the ultimate black swan event, something outside the models entirely. The fact that insurance executives aren't publicly discussing 322 Atlas suggests either they've assessed risk as zero or they've assessed it as uninsurable, meaning the consequences are so catastrophic that no amount of preparation or capital reserves would matter. If 38 represents attack or precursor to attack, our defensive options are limited to hardening against specific threats we can anticipate. If the threat is kinetic, objects moving at relativistic velocities impacting cities or infrastructure, there's no defense beyond detection and evacuation, and even that requires warning time we might not get. If the threat is biological engineered pathogens released to reduce human population before colonization, then biocurity and rapid vaccine development become critical. But defending against unknown biology designed by intelligence millions of years more advanced is probably futile. If the threat is mimetic, information warfare, or psychological operations exploiting our cognitive biases and social divisions, then we're already vulnerable, already compromised by our own technologies that track and manipulate behavior for profit, making us easy targets for anyone who understands those systems better than we do. The only defense that might work is not being worth attacking, maintaining such low profile and limited capability that we're beneath notice, not interesting enough or threatening enough to justify the energy expenditure of eliminating us. But we've already failed that strategy by broadcasting our presence and developing nuclear weapons. We're loud and dangerous, at least to ourselves, which makes us exactly the kind of nent threat that dark forest calculus suggests should be suppressed before it matures. 3 Itals, if it's carrying out that calculus, represents judgment being passed on whether we're allowed to continue. Or dark forest theory is wrong. Maybe the galaxy isn't hostile. Maybe advanced civilizations develop beyond resource scarcity and territorial competition. Maybe they operate from abundance rather than scarcity, and see emerging intelligence as opportunity rather than threat. The zoo hypothesis suggests Earth is protected reserve, deliberately left alone by civilizations monitoring our development, waiting for us to reach maturity before making contact. Prime Directive in Star Trek codifies this as ethical principle. Non-inference with pre-warp civilizations. 3 Atlas could be part of monitoring system, checking on the preserve, ensuring we're developing naturally without outside contamination. The counter to zoo hypothesis is that it requires consensus among all civilizations capable of reaching us, and achieving such consensus seems improbable when even humans can't agree on basic ethics. One rogue faction, one empire operating from different values, and the zoo fence breaks unless the monitoring civilization is so advanced, so powerful that they can enforce the reserve against all comers. But that introduces its own problems. Benevolent dictatorship is still dictatorship, and we're in no position to consent to or reject being zoo exhibits. There's also possibility that contact already happened long ago, and what we're experiencing now is not first contact, but re-establishment of contact after period of isolation. The ancient astronaut hypothesis that human civilization was influenced or even created by extraterrestrial intervention has support from anomalies in archaeology and mythology. Structures like Egyptian pyramids, Mayan temples, Easter Island moai, they represent engineering and organizational capabilities that seem advanced for their claimed time periods. Myths from cultures worldwide describe sky gods, star beings, celestial vehicles, knowledge given by those who came from above. If these represent actual encounters rather than imagination, then 3E Atlas might be those ancestors returning, checking on how their experiment or intervention has progressed. This reframes the risk. We're not encountering unknown alien intelligence, but reconnecting with known alien intelligence that has history with us, expectations about us, possibly ownership claims on us. The dark forest calculus changes if we're not prey stumbling through wilderness, but livestock in managed pasture, domestic animals whose free-range period is ending. Not better necessarily, just different kind of threat. Loss of autonomy rather than loss of life, though the distinction might not matter much in practice. The timeline pressure is real. 3-2 Atlas will be visible in December, closest to Earth in early 2026, then departing toward Jupiter, and eventually exiting the solar system entirely by late 2026. We have roughly 14 months from now to gather data, reach conclusions, implement responses if responses are necessary. That's not much time for institutions that move slowly, for international cooperation that's currently fractured, for technologies that would need to be developed from scratch. If we needed to mount defense or establish communication or evacuate populations, 14 months is inadequate for anything except triage and prayer. Lowe argues the cost of being wrong, of dismissing 3 Atlas as natural when it's actually technological and potentially hostile, far exceeds the cost of preparing for threat that turns out to be false alarm. Better to overreact and waste resources than underreact and face extinction. The precautionary principle applied to cosmic risk. But governments and institutions operate on different risk calculus, where visible action that proves unnecessary damages careers and credibility more than invisible inaction that leads to catastrophe beyond their control. No one gets blamed for not preventing the unpreventable, but everyone gets blamed for sounding alarm that proves false. This is the dark forest dilemma. Act as if every shadow hides predator and you live in constant fear, wasting resources on defenses never needed. Act as if no predators exist and you're unprepared when one emerges. The optimal strategy requires accurate threat assessment. But accurate assessment requires information we don't have. 3I8 less hasn't attacked, hasn't communicated, hasn't revealed intentions. It's just moving through our space following trajectory that might be natural or might be calculated. We're left guessing, projecting our fears and hopes onto ambiguous data, trying to decide whether silence means safety or whether we're standing in open meadow while scopes zero in and triggers prepare to squeeze. And by the time we hear the shot, it's already too late to run. Chapter 7, Emergence and Revelation. November approaches as I write this, and with it comes the re-emergence of 3E Atlas, From behind the Sun for over a month, the object has been invisible from Earth, hidden in solar glare during what should be its period of maximum activity. Perihelion passage on October 29th, when heating from Sun's radiation would cause intense outgassing if this were normal comet. We have no direct observations from that critical window, only the sparse data from Mars flyby in early October, and whatever classified observations might exist from solar monitoring satellites that aren't sharing their findings publicly. What we do know is that 3I-8 Atlas survived perihelion. Objects approaching the Sun sometimes fragment from thermal stress, break apart spectacularly as ices sublimate faster than structural integrity can withstand. Comet Eason in 2013 disintegrated during its perihelion passage, going from bright naked-eye object to dispersed cloud of debris. 3D Atlas, by all indications, remains intact, coherent, still following its calculated trajectory outward toward the outer solar system. This is evidence for something, though interpreting what requires more data than we currently have. ESA's JUICE spacecraft Jupiter Icy Moons Explorer is positioned to observe 3I Atlas in November as it travels toward its own destination in the Jovian system. JUICE carries sophisticated instruments including cameras, spectrometers, and particle detectors that could provide unprecedented detail about the object's composition, structure, and emissions. The European Space Agency has confirmed JUICE will attempt observations during November, coordinating potentially with NASA's Europa Clipper mission, which is also en route to Jupiter. The twin ultraviolet spectrographs on both spacecraft could observe 3E Atlas simultaneously from different angles, providing stereoscopic data that reveals three-dimensional structure and rotation characteristics. But there's a catch. JUICE is currently close to the Sun in its orbital trajectory, using its main high-gain antenna as heat shield to protect sensitive instruments. It's communicating with Earth through smaller medium-gain antenna at much reduced data rate, and because JUE is on opposite side of Sun from Earth, transmission distances are maximum and relay opportunities are limited. ESA has stated clearly that they don't expect to receive data from JU's 322 Atlas observations until February 2026, 3 months after the observations occur. By then, 3T Atlas will have continued its outward journey past Earth's orbit, approaching Jupiter, and whatever it did or didn't do during December will already be history. This delay is frustrating but unavoidable given orbital mechanics and telecommunications limitations. It also means that if something significant happens in December, if 3I releases smaller objects as remote viewers predicted, if it transmits signals or alters course or exhibits behaviors requiring immediate response, we'll be reacting without benefit of the best observational data. We'll have ground-based telescope observations, which are valuable but limited by atmospheric distortion and the object's relatively faint magnitude. We'll have space telescope observations from Hubble and Webb if those assets are directed toward 3I Atlas. But scheduling those observations requires advanced planning and competing priorities from other astronomical programs. Amateur astronomers have been filling gaps in professional coverage, and they'll be critical in December. The global network of amateur telescopes, coordinated through online platforms and driven by genuine curiosity rather than institutional constraints, can provide near-continuous monitoring. As 3 Atlas becomes visible again, they've already captured images during the object's approach that reveal details professional astronomers missed. And their contributions will only increase as professional assets remain focused on other targets or remain tangled in bureaucratic delays. One amateur in particular, YouTuber known as Dobsonian Power, captured an image during the Mars flyby period that sparked intense online debate. The image enhanced through stacking multiple exposures to increase signal-to-noise ratio appeared to show angular structures within 3 Atlas's coma, dark features that didn't match the diffuse distribution expected from simple dust and gas. The structures looked geometric, almost artificial, leading to wild speculation about internal machinery or surface installations visible through the surrounding material. Critics argued the features were artifacts of image processing, pareidolia where human pattern recognition sees faces and structures in random noise. But the debate itself highlights how starved we are for clear data. How much interpretation is required when dealing with ambiguous images from objects millions of miles away? The periodic variations detected in 3 Atlas's brightness and position during August and September observations add another layer of complexity. Preliminary analysis published in Astronomer's Telegram suggested possible 4-hour period in positional deviations with corresponding 2-hour period in brightness variations. These could indicate rotation of an irregularly shaped object with different faces reflecting different amounts of sunlight as the object tumbles through space. But they could also indicate active processes, venting from specific locations, engines firing in pulses, internal dynamics that manifest as external variations. ExoMar Trace Gas Orbiter's animated sequence from the Mars flyby showed 3I Atlas exhibiting more variation than background stars, suggesting real changes rather than observational artifacts. Those changes could be outgassing plumes appearing and disappearing as ices in specific regions are heated by sunlight, then move into shadow. Or they could be something else. Deployed probes entering and leaving the field of view. Structural elements moving activity that has nothing to do with sublimating ISIS and everything to do with intelligence directing operations. We need to be careful here not to overinterpret ambiguous data to fit preferred narratives. Human psychology is wired to see patterns and assign agency to perceive intention behind events that might be entirely mechanical or random. This is how religions form, how conspiracy theories propagate, how we make sense of complex world by creating stories that give events meaning beyond mere occurrence. 3 Atlas might be doing nothing except existing, moving according to physics, losing mass through natural processes, rotating from ancient collisions or gravitational interactions, and all the anomalies we've discussed could have prosaic explanations we simply haven't discovered yet. But acknowledging that possibility doesn't mean dismissing the anomalies. Science advances by taking observations seriously, by not being satisfied with hand-waving dismissals that don't actually explain the data. 3 Atlas lacks a tail when it should have one. Its chemistry is wrong for comets we know. Its trajectory is suspiciously aligned with planetary orbits. Its mass exceeds what its size should allow, given observed brightness. These are facts requiring explanation. And if natural explanations exist, let's find them through rigorous analysis rather than assuming they exist and moving on. Avibi has been tireless in advocating for exactly this approach. Treat 3E Atlas as potentially anomalous until proven otherwise. Direct resources toward observation and analysis. Gather maximum data while opportunity exists. His critics accuse him of attention-seeking, of promoting alien hypotheses to maintain media profile. Maybe there's truth to that. Incentives shape all behavior, including scientific behavior. But Lowe has also put his reputation and time where his advocacy is, leading the Galileo project to develop monitoring systems that will track millions of objects per year, analyzing them for signatures of technology, taking seriously the possibility that we might not be alone, and the evidence of others might be in our data already if we just looked with right tools and open minds. The Galileo project represents practical implementation of astroarcheology, the search for artifacts rather than radio signals, SETI. The search for extraterrestrial intelligence has focused for decades on electromagnetic transmissions. Assuming that advanced civilizations broadcast their presence intentionally or that their routine communications leak into space as detectable technosignatures. But Lowe argues that artifacts, physical objects in space, might be more numerous and longer lasting than signals. A probe launched millions of years ago continues operating, or at least existing, long after civilizations that built it might have collapsed or transcended. Finding one such artifact confirms intelligence elsewhere, even if that intelligence is now extinct or unreachable. 3I-8 class could be that first artifact, the first confirmed detection of technology from beyond Earth, or it could be second or third or 10th, depending on whether Oumuamua and other candidates are eventually recognized as artificial. The resistance to accepting any interstellar object as artificial comes partly from legitimate scientific conservatism, extraordinary claims requiring extraordinary evidence, but partly from psychological discomfort